Welcome to the Right Take Podcast, news, ideas, and conversations at the intersection of politics and culture, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I will be your host, Mark Tapson. Welcome again to the Right Take Podcast. I am your host, Mark Tapson. Thanks for joining me. I have a great guest today who is not only a close friend of mine, but somebody who's capable of talking about pop culture, politics, philosophy, storytelling, theology, you name it. And he never lacks for insights into what's going on in the culture. So don't miss our conversation coming up. But first, I want to set the scene a little bit in terms of the pernicious ideology of wokeness and its effect on storytelling in the culture. We all recognize that wokeness, or what is essentially cultural Marxism, is a divisive, destructive force that's infected every aspect of society, from education to corporate culture to sports to politics. And I want to address a couple of examples of ways in which wokeness continues to poison the field of entertainment, which is not just a frivolous part of our lives, but it's arguably a very substantial part of our contemporary cultural worldview. First, my friend John Nolte over at Breitbart News recently wrote a piece called "Stephen King's New Novel is Full of Bigotry and COVID Misinformation," in which he laments that King, who was once America's storyteller with a string of great tales like Carrie, The Shining, The Stand, The Dead Zone, Firestarter, and Misery, but today King is just an aging palace guard for the establishment. Nolte goes on to say that King's latest novel, Holly, is burdened with overt, woke messaging that includes villains who are predictably racist, anti-vaccine, old, and white, while the protagonists of the book are all women, minorities, homosexuals, or some combination of the three. Nolte calls Stephen King's treatment of Christians beyond scurrilous, in that there is a vegan black lesbian character who is victimized by her Christian family on religious grounds for not eating meat. She is gang raped by several members of the family's church, and when she aborts the resulting baby, her family disowns her. Then Stephen King goes on, also predictably, to claim that COVID nursing home deaths were all because an orderly refused to get an mRNA vaccine because it was developed using cells from aborted fetuses. My friend Nolte notes that King fails to mention the truth about COVID, which is that Democrat governors committed murder on an industrial scale by forcing COVID patients into nursing homes. John Nolte concludes by stating that Stephen King has not only become a, quote, a bigot and an uptight square who looks like everyone's lesbian aunt, but he's also become a propaganda tool for the establishment, unquote. Another instance that I want to mention of storytelling being ruined by wokeness has to do with the new James Bond novel called On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Now, this is not a new novel from Bond creator Ian Fleming, of course, who passed away decades ago. There have been several novelists since Fleming who have been authorized by the Bond estate to carry on with new James Bond adventures, including the latest author, Charlie Higson. The new Bond novel is causing a bit of a stir because Higson has apparently taken 007 in a ludicrously woke direction. Bond is now a walking parody of progressive pieties with open disdain for what he calls the far right, by which he means anyone to the right of Tony Blair. Neil Gooch over at The Spectator has a scorching takedown of the novel, and I'm going to read some selections from Gooch's piece to give you an idea of just how bad the book is. In his article, Meet the Awful New Progressive James Bond, Gooch writes that Higson's contribution to the Bond mythology is outstandingly terrible. It makes Dan Brown look like a master of nuance, understatement, and subtle characterization. Gooch adds that, quote, it is the portrayal of its villains where the book becomes truly farcically bad. The men drawn to the principal villain's dastardly scheme are preposterous caricatures of the kind of people whom author Higson dislikes. In other words, people who have any kind of reservations at all about any aspect of progressive politics. None of them is a genuine character. Instead, they are mere empty vessels onto which Higson projects his bizarre fantasies about the motivations and beliefs of conservatives. People who are skeptical about mass immigration or transgenderism or the erosion of free speech are simply itching to engage in mass terror attacks in the heart of London, apparently." Unquote. Neil Gooch concludes in his article, quote, "On His Majesty's Secret Service is clearly a work of propaganda. I admit to being somewhat surprised by quite how leaden and didactic this book was. Are there no editors left? I asked myself as I waded through the underpowered, hectoring prose. Perhaps, however, that is a function of how hegemonic Higson's views are among the creative classes. After all, goldfish do not know they are wet, and people who conform instinctively and wholeheartedly to contemporary pieties about borders and gender and free speech and identity find it very difficult to understand the extent of their epistemic bubbles. We seem to be entering an age when didactic pro-establishment propaganda with little merit is not only everywhere, but goes unremarked and uncriticized because the people with cultural power generally agree with each other about almost every issue of importance. There is less intellectual diversity in our creative classes, less genuine openness to opposing ideas than there has been for well over a century." Unquote. Again, that was Neil Gooch over at The Spectator writing about the new Bond novel. And I could share excerpts from a couple of other articles I came across that examine the novel in more detail, but I don't want to get too bogged down in it, and I'm eager to get on to our guest. Suffice it to say that what should have been a thrilling new Bond adventure has been reduced by woke storytelling to boring progressive propaganda. Now, what's the big deal, you might be asking? So what if one of America's major storytellers and one of our culture's most recognizable and influential heroes have gone woke? Why should anyone care? Well, the answer is that humans are storytelling animals, and storytelling, more than any other cultural expression, is how we define ourselves as individuals, as a community, as a culture. Great storytelling that engages you and moves you and resonates with you shapes the way we view ourselves and our ideals and our values and guides us toward the true, the good, and the beautiful. It can even inspire us to take right action in our own lives. Storytelling has great power. But wokeness, or any heavy-handed politicization of storytelling, fails as storytelling because it serves the purpose of taking you out of the story, of breaking your willing suspension of disbelief. It functions only as propaganda. Now, propaganda, of course, can have a very powerful impact too, but it's bad storytelling. And when storytellers like Stephen King or the writers authorized to carry on the James Bond legacy resort to pushing propaganda, then they are failing us and failing to create anything of value for our culture. And on that note, stay tuned for my guest coming up next because we're going to dive deeper into this topic, and you won't want to miss my friend's insights on this. In the interim, during the upcoming rockin' musical interlude, don't forget to subscribe to the Right Take podcast so you don't miss any of the great conversations that we have been having here and will continue to have in the future. I have a lot of amazing guests lined up for future episodes. Don't touch that dial. My guest today at the Right Take podcast is Brian Godawa, an award-winning screenwriter and filmmaker, best known for the great movie To End All Wars with Kiefer Sutherland, and perhaps also for last year's controversial hit called My Son Hunter, about Joe Biden's corrupt, profligate son and the laptop from hell. He's also a lecturer and a scholar and author of nonfiction. His book Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment, is used as a textbook in schools around the country, and I highly recommend it. He can speak about storytelling more insightfully than anybody I know. Brian is also a best-selling author of biblical novels, including his Chronicles series, Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, and Chronicles of the Apocalypse. And he has a brand new novel out called Cruel Logic, which is not part of that series. In fact, it's part of a brand new series of theological thrillers, which we will talk about further. And I'm honored to say he's been a close friend of mine for many years. Brian was one of my very first guests at the Right Take podcast. In fact, it was 1 year ago, almost to the day, that I had him on last. Brian Godawa, welcome back to the Right Take podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's an honor. It was an honor to be your first guest, and I love the show. So
thanks. Before we get started, I noticed over the weekend that Fox News Digital or Fox News Online, whatever it calls itself, did a profile of you and a couple of other people about how faith how your Christian faith kind of informs and guides your work. So congratulations on that. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, thanks. It was just it was an interesting little quick thing on the spot. That's like my publicist contacted me and say, "Hey, can you write this stuff out? They're looking for this." And, and I'm like, okay. And, I didn't, I figured they were sending it out to a bunch of different people. And, so it was an honor to be picked. But, the premise of it was, how do you live out your faith in your work and such? And as a writer, my main, my main point that I just brought out was just a brief, very, very brief couple paragraphs. And it was just that I addressed not merely the relationships, of course, that we have, but the work itself. I wanted to address the work itself and how I work that out. So I said things like, I seek to obey God in what I do. So, for instance, I don't screw people because that's business, even though a lot of people do that. And I've been screwed by conservatives and Christians and, but I don't do that because I don't want to live my life that way, but also things like do not lie, don't plagiarize, don't, give credit to people where credit's due, and don't lie just to support your point. Thou shalt not lie. Right. And things like that just were sort of addressing a few of the 10 Commandments and how they apply to living out your work in a way that a lot of people today don't really care for. People are often ideologically driven, especially journalists, right, where it's all about the narrative, not about the facts. Those kinds of things are really violations of God's commands, and I can't live that way. So yeah, it was fun to sort of sit down and, jot those things down, but it was great.
Yeah, one of my conservative Hollywood friends, in fact, he's a mutual friend of yours and mine, told me once that his agent said to him, "Keep this in mind all the time. Screw everybody but you." And I thought, wow, that's some pretty intense, professional advice to be giving. But I think it says a lot about Hollywood. Anyway, in my opening remarks for this episode, I commented about some examples in which wokeness is ruining storytelling with its really heavy-handed political messaging. For example, the latest James Bond novel is really just sort of so ridiculously political that it's kind of like a parody of wokeness. You want to give your take on the problem with that kind of overt political messaging, and not just the messaging, but even the woke casting in today's Hollywood, which is so clearly pushing kind of an agenda of forced diversity and equity.
Yeah. Sadly enough, it's one of the reasons why I had to leave, at least leave Los Angeles and moved out to Texas, because I realized that although I had always sort of been in the independent side of movie making, we could fly under the radar, do our good movies, but have our subtle, different perspective than, Hollywood has been captured by the left for decades. And so, just trying to have a different viewpoint in our storytelling, get under the radar. But now I realized, when they made that claim for the Academy Awards now, that no movies would be accepted unless they had these certain quotients and diversity and equity and all this kind of stuff, having completely nothing to do with the actual storytelling. But yeah, deeply political. And, I don't really care about the Oscars, and I haven't for a decade, but that still, that symbolizes what's going on in the industry. And I would hear executives literally saying, we're looking to writers as well as all other positions. We're not looking for white males and certainly not older white males, right? Because they're the enemy. And when I saw that was happening, I knew, okay, that was just, Hollywood is dead, because there's now no longer any chance for people who are truly conservative or even Christian. There's not really any room anymore to even fly in under the radar, because they're hunting us down. And a lot of people have followed suit and have left as well. Doesn't mean we're not making movies, of course, because I did make My Son Hunter, but yeah, just sort of like not able to really work within that system anymore. And it's really sad and pathetic too, because even, normal people watching movies are complaining about just the wokeness and how it's really just bad storytelling. It's not, like, nor, the normal viewer probably doesn't, maybe they've heard the word woke, but they don't really know what it means, that it actually means a neo-Marxist worldview that sees the world as reduced to two kinds of people, oppressed and oppressor. And the oppressor is the white male heterosexual Christian, and the oppressed are all peoples of color and women and gays and all that. And so we are, these men are the enemy and all this kind of stuff. And they don't realize that the depth of the philosophy of it, but they can watch these things and they can say, why are they forcing all action movies now to be led by women? With a few exceptions, obviously, Tom Cruise, they're going to still get their movies, but all other action movies other than the big superstars guys, they're all led by women, women Navy SEALs, women commanders, women, and it's just, I don't even watch them anymore. I'm not interested in the action movies anymore because it's just ridiculous. It's not, I used to love an occasional movie where you have like some Charlize Theron is an assassin, and it's just kind of like, it's a joke. But it's a fun joke and we're in on it and we enjoy it, right? But now it's not a joke. They're taking it seriously as if all these, 115-pound women can kick the butts of 250 or 225-pound men. It's just beyond ridiculous, and it's just not interesting. But also the stories themselves are then suffering because of it. And I think people are noting this, and isn't the I guess we'll see Snow, obviously Barbie, as horribly woke as it was, it did do huge numbers, but I think that was riding on the coattails of decades of a successful toy product. People weren't ready for it, or some people just, didn't care or whatever. But we'll see what happens with the new Snow White, where it's been trumpeted as being, no more dwarves, no more marginalized people. And the Snow White's not going to be a white woman, and she's not going to be saved by the prince. And so these kinds of components where you cannot do certain things because it violates our leftist, feminist, or, ideological concerns. Not only is it like you're watching a leftist sermon, a religious sermon you're getting preached to, but it's not the values of people, women do want to be rescued by a man. Women do want to be taken care of by men. Men want to rescue, provide, protect, and care for women. And, but that of course is all automatically now patriarchal fascism and in that world. Right. So so I think it's a combination of the values of the viewers. They're not interested in it, but also it's just not good storytelling when you're forcing. People don't like to be preached at, right? We've heard this, for forever, like Christian movies are so bad because they're preaching at you, aside from the fact that they have bad acting and bad writing, but they're preaching at you. And it's like, well, now we should have a new genre category of preachy atheistic movies or preachy woke movies. It's like, it's the same thing as bad Christian movies. So, we should throw that category out there and start calling these things what they are. But yeah, it's sad. And, but interestingly, the same, it's everywhere. All the institutional, the commanding heights of all the institutions are captured by this ideology in the book publishing world. So I'm an author. And I have my own publishing company because they wouldn't take my books. What I wrote wasn't acceptable at the time by Christians. Actually, I tend to write Bible stories and stuff, although this new Cruel Logic is not. But what I'm getting at is traditional publishing houses now also it's the same way. They're only looking for things like, we only want LGBTQ affirming books and stories and authors, literally. And that's what they're focusing on. So they're literally suppressing anything of quality done by white people. And, but if white people are the majority, then you're going to be cutting out a lot of good stuff. And it's not to say that there isn't any good stuff. Obviously, there's great stuff written by minorities of all kinds. But when you're inversing like that and you're deliberately acting in a racist manner. You're suppressing someone's work because of the color of their skin in the name of equity. You're obviously you are degrading the quality and the excellence of that field. And aren't we seeing the effect of that right now?
Yeah, and when you push the politics to the front, or an agenda or a worldview right to the front of the story, it really just destroys what they call the willing suspension of disbelief. And that is death to a story. That takes the audience right out of the story and makes them conscious of something else instead of being deeply immersed in the tale itself. Conservatives aren't immune themselves to putting politics at the expense of storytelling. I mean, it's kind of understandable. I think the conservative creators want to connect with this huge underserved conservative audience out there that's starved for entertainment that doesn't insult them or sucker punch them with progressive politics. But overall, for any storyteller, it's not a good idea to set out to write a quote unquote conservative movie, unquote, that preaches to the choir. What do you think about that?
Well, this is the thing, great story. Here's the problem, is that there is a wide berth of kinds of storytelling, and there are some stories that are more propagandistic oriented. Propaganda is not inherently bad. It can be bad if it's excessive or if it's promoting falsehood. But I have to admit that sometimes propaganda can be good. I won't deny that. I would argue, some people would disagree, but I think James Cameron is a good example of this, where he's a fantastic storyteller. And, his stories of like Avatar and all, they're all like massively propaganda for his earth worship, but they're still great storytelling because he knows how to tell a story. But here's the difference is, if you embody your worldview within the storytelling and the choices of the characters in a believable, realistic way, because there are many people who believe in different ways and make different choices. And if you tell that story and seek to at least show somewhat of an honest or fair portrayal of opposing ideas, opposing views, opposing characters, right? The essence of drama is conflict, right? But what is conflict? Conflict is opposing views in the story. Different people have different, beliefs about the way the world should be, and the drama of the story is what works that out, right? And so, if every story does have a viewpoint, so there's nothing wrong with having a political viewpoint. And actually, I think a political movie can be worthy, and if it's well done and fairly. Now, sadly, you see these Hollywood political movies, whether it's the Comey Rule or the one about Sarah Palin, the Game Changer, they always demonize, Republicans, and they're foolish and they're really dumb and uninteresting because they don't treat their opponents with fairness. And those who are on that side can see that and go, this isn't what we're like, so you don't even know who we are. But if you're honest enough to say, well, I want to portray them in the best light possible, even though I believe they're wrong, right? That's where you get a good story that's honest and it doesn't come up with the propaganda absolutes. So for instance, when we did My Son Hunter, right? My Son Hunter is a political satire, which is mocking and having fun about Hunter Biden's laptop. The one story nobody in Hollywood would ever tell. And so we made it outside the system, of course. But when we went about writing that, my interest in it wasn't merely the political side of it. In fact, I wasn't interested in doing a political movie. What intrigued me was the relationship between Hunter and his father and his deceased brother, Bo. It actually was sort of like the two sons and the father was a very classical tragedy of dysfunction that a lot of families have. But in this case, it's more like a mafiosa situation, kind of like The Godfather in politics. But it was really intriguing because, you got to have the sex and drugs and rock and roll of Hunter Biden's life in the story. That's the surface elements that people are drawn to in watching movies. But, and even the political stuff, there was so much political corruption. But to me, the context of it was that relationship with the father-son relationship. And so, and the producers and I both, when I was writing it, we both agreed we do not want to demonize Hunter. And sure enough, the left all universally hated the movie, but some of them even admitted that, wow, they actually made Hunter quite empathetic. And some of them couldn't understand that. They're like, they must have accidentally made Hunter empathetic. They didn't even realize it because they don't know if they were to tell a story about Republicans, they would demonize. So they can't even understand someone actually not demonizing their political opponents. That's how blind and deluded and ideologically deluded a lot of storytellers in Hollywood and in the media, right? So that to me meant we were successful, because it's like we did want to be empathetic about him and display the tragedy of Hunter Biden, but yet still obviously reveal the crimes that the Biden family have been engaged in. And of course, now everything that's coming out now is actually in the movie, because this information has been around for years. The emails that are now coming out and indicting him about all these connections, there's maybe a few that are new, but most all these connections to China and all that stuff, we're not even talking about the gun charges or the prostitution. That's just side fodder. But all these political connections to China and to nuclear powers and stuff, it's like, that's already been around. It's just that it was suppressed by the media, right? So yeah, we have that in the story. But even then, what's important about what's going on is not the politics of it, but it's the morality of what's going on within that family. So a good story, even if it deals with politics, is going to have the concern of the deeper human nature and morality, not the surface, politics and demonizing your opponents.
Can you think, apart from My Son Hunter, can you think of a movie or a series that you've seen lately, whether it's new or not, that you think strikes just the right balance of story and message that maybe you could recommend to quote-unquote conservative viewers?
Wow, that's a tough one. Give me a second, because I try to keep a list, because here's the thing. As deeply corrupted and as far gone as Hollywood is, there's still a lot of good there, and there's still a lot of good people, and they do somehow get through sometimes. So I'm not going to deny that does occur. But in terms of messaging and stuff like that, it tends to be more like worldview stuff. But let's say things like pro-life. Like I'm pro-life, and any movie that's going to have that pro-life element to it, in other words, supporting life, is going to be great. But even then, again, you can't be loud and proud about it. So you have to embody it within the story. And so in a way, popular movies like Arrival, which is now available on Netflix, right? There's a secondary story about this woman and knowing the future of a child that she's going to have, and yet still choosing to have that child. There's just the act of choosing a child despite all the arguments against it, which is what our society does promote. To me, that's a simple choice, a moral choice that supports life. You can see how that's a story element, though, too, right? Because it wrestles with the humanity and the person choosing. A Quiet Place is another movie. It's a horror movie, with John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, and it's a post-apocalyptic world, and the whole idea there is, with all this danger and evil, it supports the benefits and the blessing of having a family and uniting together with families. And just that itself, just promoting family connectedness, I think is the deepest way of touching us on that level. But in terms of strictly sort of stronger, explicit messaging, I would recommend The Death of Stalin. I just recently saw that again. It's a few years old. It's another political satire about Stalin's death, literally, and how the delusion of communism works, as well as the life and death danger that you have living under totalitarianism. All his leaders are jockeying to keep themselves alive when Stalin dies, because who's going to get killed in the next purge is the whole question, right? And that, wow, that's a really gripping political thing, but also there's a movie that was out, that I would recommend, that was out recently. And this is where I want to sort of give the qualification of, just because wokeness is itself a racist ideology doesn't mean that there isn't racism, and doesn't mean that we shouldn't make movies about racism, right? Or whatever, or marginalized minorities. It's just why, what's the real message that you're giving? And one example of that is perfectly politically correct and woke, technically, is King Richard. The true story of the Williams sisters, with Will Smith in it. And this is a story that's talking about two Black girls and some of the struggles they had with racism, but also it's honest enough to show the violence within the Black community. And it deals with not being a victim. It doesn't promote victimhood and political grievances, but rising up in your own strength and goodness or whatever, and achieving and pursuing excellence and rising above, rather than blaming and accusing and demonizing the system and making yourself into a victim. And so that's a good example where on the surface, it's very politically correct, you'd say, but the message of it is very much rooted in I just think a positive, unifying view of life, rather than the divisive, polarizing, demonizing that we are seeing in everything now, not just in the extreme issues like pro-life and abortion or, immigration maybe, but like literally down to every single political viewpoint now, it's always, demonizing of the opponents. And it's just driving this culture into violence. And, as we're talking here, people might be thinking like, what does this have to do with your new novel? Get to your new novel. Well, actually it has everything to do with the novel Cruel Logic, because, the novel that I wrote was also a response, a reaction to our current sociocultural world of violence. And where does this violence come from? And, my personal convictions are that, historically speaking, the university is a origin point for a lot of the evils that occur in the world. Why? Because it's in the university that philosophies and worldviews are worked out, but it's removed from normal everyday reality at first, obviously, and it's philosophizing, and they're debating, and they're talking amongst themselves. And oftentimes you get this esoteric, whatever. The academy can be very removed from reality. However, what happens in the academy? Well, those professors then teach students, and students are the young people, the next generation. And the young people, their brains are literally not as developed, but also they are more manipulated, easily manipulated, because they don't have the development and the maturity. And so they take this philosophy that is once academic, they bring it with them as they leave the university. And they're also more emotional. They are more prone to passionate outbreaks, right? So that's why you get all these student protests. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, because if you look at history, there's been spiritual awakenings that have occurred amongst students and young people, as well as the violence and protests and stuff. So, and then they leave, and then they obviously get jobs eventually, because you have to survive, right? But then they bring that philosophy with them. And what are we seeing now? We see the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is sort of like the dominant, that's one good way of summarizing the worldview. That's captured everything through human resources, and it's in all the Fortune 500 companies. It's in all the government organizations. It's in all of education, because they took that with them. So that's how you see the process of these ideas filter down into the masses. And so now people are shocked and dealing with struggling with what is going on here? At universities, students are literally trying to stomp out free speech. in a world where we've always assumed free speech is our number one right. And now they're literally arguing for no, free speech is not good. We should suppress some speech that we consider hate speech, etc. Well, how does that happen? Well, that's how it happens. It filters down in that way. And so I wanted to tell a story about the university and about how ideas have consequences. And now the university, the higher education has been captured by this woke culture. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to sort of depict that in a story in a way that would be realistic, so people could see what's the world like there in that university, and what does that wokeness look like, and how does it, and where is it leading in that sense, right? So that's sort of the environment that I have the story taking place. But the actual premise of the story is about a serial killer in the woke university. And the idea is that this killer is actually a philosophy professor who captures university professors and he debates them. And the topic of his debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll say, okay, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I should kill you. Or I'm sorry, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid reason why I should not kill you, and I'll let you go. In other words, he's using logic to try to examine all these various worldviews of these professors, evolutionary biologists, queer theorists, all these different professors, and they're the cream of the crop for their intellect, right? And he's challenging them to give them a valid reason not to kill them. And so, of course, they're failing miserably. And that's not the only thing that there's twists and turns that this guy his purpose is more than just that on the surface. He's got a goal himself that I'm not going to reveal, but nevertheless, that's sort of the premise of the story. And I wanted to wrestle with this notion of ideas having consequences, and many things that we think about, or even that we're debating about in the public square. Even we don't think through, or a lot of people don't think through. Hey, listen, if we apply what you say, look at what will result, and that's sort of my goal in storytelling. And so on one level, I do have a very, I have a Christian worldview that I'm bringing to the text. I'm telling a story that's rooted within that worldview. But even then, my goal was to depict the university accurately, and even the people in it that I don't agree with, I wanted to depict them in a way that's realistic and accurate, and what they're really like, and not demonize them all, right? And so I literally drew from events that have been occurring in the last 5 or 6 years on various university campuses, taking down the Columbus statues, stomping out or getting professors, fired for their views and stuff like that. And this whole gender thing now, the pronouns, all these issues that are going on campus. I wanted to accurately depict that and show that viewpoint, but then also show where it leads. And where it leads is not a good end. It's ultimately a violent end in my point of view.
Yeah, well, I have, I read the book before you published it, and thought it was excellent. And I'm not just saying that because we're friends. In fact, it's precisely because we're friends that I wanted to give you an honest take on the book, because if it were terrible, I would want you to know before you published it.
Yes. And and everybody listening, I honestly would want him to tell me that.
And you envision it as the first of a series of theological thrillers. What do you mean by, can you tell us what you mean by theological thriller as a genre?
Yeah, here's the thing. As I was writing, you have to accurately depict to your audience the kind of genre that it is, because people are really looking for specific kinds of stories that they like, and they don't like being hoodwinked, or they don't like being tricked when you tell them it's this genre, but it's not, like, say, oh, it's an epic adventure, but it's really a romance. It's more of a romance, and like, well, I don't want to, that's how readers respond. And I sat there and thought, well, this is a serial killer story, which is very much in the vein of Silence of the Lambs, absolutely, or the movie Seven, but it has a unique take to it. It is a sort of it's very intellectual in some senses, you know, and I don't want people to just think that, oh, this is just going to be like every other, you know, serial killer story or something, but that there's more to it. But at the same token, it's not, you know, it's not really, how can I put it? It's not, yeah, I guess the best way that I could describe it was, it's a thriller, but what makes it different from the other thrillers? It's theological. It has a kind of a theological edge to it. I was going to call it an intellectual thriller because I do like bringing in philosophy and all that kind of stuff. But I felt that even that didn't point as strongly to the context as theology does. So theology tells you, okay, this is an intelligent story, but it also wrestles with, and this is what the series is about, the human nature, sin, depravity, and the existence of God, the problem of evil, and the existence of God and human nature. Those are universal issues that everyone struggles with, no matter what religious belief you have. And I want to wrestle with that in a, you know, faithful and honest way. And so this is the first in the series. Now, it's not going to be like Cruel Logic Part 2 or anything like that. It'll be completely standalone novels, but they all deal with that sort of, you know, intelligent usage of the thriller medium. So, you know, I love a good, entertaining story, and that is literally a ultimate priority. I will not write a story unless it's entertaining, and I will not write a scene unless it's entertaining. I will delete it. Yet, at the same time, I also seek to tell stories that have meaning and purpose. And if you look at all the great storytellers of history, you know, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, sorry to pick just Russians there, but Michael Crichton, you know, they all have, they're all communicating some strong, powerful moral views about the world, and I'm trying to do that as well.
Yeah. Did you find it difficult to balance the story in terms of it being both a plot-driven thriller, but also a novel of ideas, which sometimes required your characters to talk about some deep concepts?
Yeah. And that's the biggest problem is there's a whole world of people who do love talking about deep concepts and they would enjoy it on any level, but then there's a lot of people who don't. And so the dilemma is always like, can you put those two together? Okay. And I'm a firm believer that you can. In fact, my goal is this. I've always loved philosophy and Christian theology. And so it interests me, but I recognize not everybody is interested by that stuff. But I do believe it's important. And so you think, well, then how can I make philosophy more interesting to people who aren't as interested in it? Well, you combine it with something like a thriller, you know, and a serial killer story. And that might at least give it context that makes it more interesting to them and keeps them in the story. It's not unlike, I use this example because it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So there's a movie that combines two completely opposite genres that would never fit together. And in fact, I don't know if it hurts it or not in terms of actual audience, but I love Jane Austen movies, right? And Jane Austen stories, you know, a lot of men wouldn't tend to like that, right? It's romance and all this kind of stuff. But as a man, I also love zombie stories, you know what I mean? And of course, women don't tend to like zombie stories as much, you know, the blood and gore and stuff. So this author mashed up the two genres and came up with the book Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And then it became a movie. And it's now one of my favorite movies because I love Jane Austen and it captures Jane Austen in a genuine way. And it also captures zombie stories in a genuine way. And I absolutely love it, you know? And so that's what my hope is that maybe I can make people who love thrillers become at least learn and be introduced to that world of ideas a little bit more, the ideas of the intellect and philosophy, and then hopefully make people who are interested in philosophy, give them a little bit of entertaining context that they could think through their ideas in more than just a logical argument, but to see them worked out in human life and drama. Because to me, that's the most powerful impact. Storytelling is the most powerful means to impact a life with ideas. And storytelling is about ideas. And it's just, you know, a lot of people don't, maybe don't know that. Maybe they just think it's entertainment and they don't realize that no, we storytellers, the very story structure that we follow of redemption of the protagonist, etc., is in fact a conversion story. Or conversion is the word that means, or redemption, it's the word that means something you see, something is wrong with a person's life, the way they see the world, or their behavior in some way. And as they journey through their story, they learn something more about themselves, what they need to change, how they need to be a better person. And that's what most stories are all about. And that really is a way of seeing the world, which is a worldview. So whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, we storytellers are influencing you with our worldviews. It's just a matter of some do it better than others, and some do it more blatantly than others. And sometimes it's propaganda, sometimes it isn't,
The Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said that he believed that everything terrible that had happened to his country, Russia, after the 1917 Communist Revolution was because man had forgotten God. And I think we've reached the point now where man is actively trying to replace God, which isn't going to end well. But the villain of your novel, Charles Cullen, states right there in the prologue that he is God. Is he a sort of reflection of our culture, generally speaking, and that mankind is trying to make a god of itself?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, all the characters in my story are rooted in a really cultural views that I see out there, as well as people. Like, for instance, that serial killer, he does represent the person who is more self-aware of the fact that, okay, what is reality going to be like without a God, right? But the other characters in the story as well. For instance, I have the psychologist who's tracking him down. His name's Joseph Callinger. He's a psychologist who had been involved in helping assess his mental capacity when he was first caught, when the killer was first caught and put on trial, and now he's escaped, right? So anyway, this psychology professor has been called in to help the cop track him down. And the professor is actually kind of like a Jordan Peterson guy, and that's Jordan Peterson represents, I think, another sort of like movement of people who intellectuals who are defending Western civilization and even defending the Judeo-Christian foundation of Western civilization, while not necessarily themselves being Christian. And I find that very intriguing. And some of them I had the utmost respect. Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Tom Holland. These guys are not necessarily Christians, but they're defending it. And that is extremely interesting to me. And I've actually thought, what would that be like? I'm not even sure. I wanted to understand that. And so part of me telling the story was to go through that journey of that character, so Callinger is like, he's supporting Western civilization and he's getting, railed for it, but he doesn't really have a faith in God. He's actually got a Jewish background, but he doesn't have a faith in God, but he does recognize that culture does need to be founded on these religious values to some extent. But yet at the same time, he's being challenged with that. And the killer also is starting to force him to look at his own soul and face his own failures and contradictions, shall we say, right? So there's a character like that. And then there's another main character in the story that brings another storyline that I wanted to just let people know about, which is another sort of phenomenon that's occurring. There's a lot of what we call Christian deconstruction or Christian deconversion that's going on today. And that's basically, usually it's celebrities that we hear about who've lost their Christian faith, and they're going on podcasts now and they're talking about it, Christian musicians and all this kind of stuff, pastors and stuff. And it's nothing new because, ever since the universities, we've had Christians going to college and losing their faith. So that's not new, but But I think because of the podcast nature, there's a lot more voices out there that we're hearing about it. It's a phenomenon. And I wanted to deal with that. I wanted to say, yeah, what is that, and what's going on, and what's the draw? So I have a character who's Danny Rains, who is an evangelical Christian freshman, first year college student. But he's a good kid, and he's not a fundamentalist. He's not a cliche or a stereotype of a Christian. He's just a typical Christian who hasn't really been equipped with a real legitimate, strong enough faith to be able to counter or even honestly deal with the skepticism of the university. And that's part of the thing that starts to crush and hurt his faith. And then how he's drawn into social justice, because a lot of Christians have been drawn into that stuff. And I wanted to wrestle with that as well, because I think a lot of people are going through that journey. And I wanted to say, well, what's that like? Where's it coming from? And where is it leading to? Because unfortunately, I would say these Christians who are been suckered into the woke movement, through guilt manipulation, basically, they're, because Christians are compassionate and they want to be loving to people. So wokeness really manipulates guilt in order to draw people in. And they think that this is for the good, but they don't realize they're being used. They don't realize that at the end of the day, shall we say, the intentions for those Christians by the woke movement is not a happy one. It's like the person who's hoping that, well, I'm behind all these other people being fed to the crocodile, and so hopefully a crocodile will be full by the time I get to it. It's like, no, he won't be. He's going to eat you too, type of thing. So yeah, so I wanted to sort of that, and that's another reason why I say theological, because I'm also dealing openly with religious themes and Christians and stuff like that. And look, that's as much a part of the world as any other part. You can tell a story about blacks in the inner city, or you could tell a story about Western cowboys in Texas. There's all kinds of cultures out there of different kinds of people and the world that they exist in. And I think Christians are one of them. So technically this is not a Christian novel. There's violence in it. There's swearing, excessive language, because I want to depict the world realistically how it is. Right. And I don't have any desire to do a cliche Christian storytelling, where people got to get saved and all this kind of stuff. I want to wrestle with the real world and the issues of God and faith, but I want to do so honestly. And so my character, Danny, listen, he's got issues that a lot of Christians struggle with, such as pornography. That's one of the things that he struggles with, even as a Christian. So I deal honestly with all viewpoints, including the weaknesses of those who I might agree with. Right. So yeah, that was my goal.
Yeah. I think the character arc of this character, Danny, in the novel was one of the most convincing and interesting parts of the book. The way he was naively seduced into this cult of social justice activism on campus. There's so many pernicious ideas that are being inculcated in college students today that it's almost as if you can't go to college anymore to explore who you are. You really need to know who you are and what you believe and be firm in your convictions before you even get there, or you won't survive the brainwashing. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's exactly right.
And that ties in also with the premise of the novel, which is, can you defend your beliefs if your life depended on it? We've reached the point where I guess people need to be able to ask themselves that question and answer it, because the world will tear you apart if you haven't settled it.
Well, here's another element of the origin of the story and why it was so powerful. I believe that the problem of evil and the existence of God, it's a universal issue. I think it's one of the most important issues of life, period. And I still wrestle with it to this day as a Christian. And the basic notion is, if you put it in philosophical terms, like Hume might say, David Hume, is if God is all loving and all powerful, why is there evil, right? Because if he's all loving, he'd want to get rid of evil. And if it was all powerful, he would get rid of evil. But if there's evil, then God's an impotent or cruel. So this is obviously not a God you want to be with, that kind of a thing. That's the argument. And, there is legitimacy to that. Technically, it's not a logical argument because there is no logical problem with the notion that, well, if the creator of the universe has a morally sufficient reason and he does not tell us for evil, then that's logically acceptable. But it's not psychologically acceptable. So, in other words, people don't like that fact. But also on an emotional level and a human level, I do, as I get older in life, I'm becoming more aware of suffering and of the evil in this world and how unfair it is and how, unjust it is. Right. And I think that anybody who has a sense of compassion does struggle with that and wonder about it and wrestle with it. And I wanted to, and unfortunately, the logical problem, like I say, I don't think there is a logical problem. It's just people don't like the answers. They don't like that answer. It's like God has a morally sufficient reason for evil. Well, that's not acceptable to me. Well, yeah, of course you want to be God, right? So it's like if you don't accept God on his terms, you're not going to like his answer. But here's the thing. Many years ago, I love Christian apologetics, and I love this one apologist. His name was Walter Martin. And he was like back in the 60s and 70s. And I remember listening to a tape, and the tape was of him on a Long John Nebel show. And he was talking about his frustration talking to an atheist. He was saying, I was trying to tell this atheist, you have no foundation for morality. If atheism is true, there's no morality. And I said, yes, there is. I believe murder's wrong. The atheist is so blinded that they often do not realize that the things they assume are contradictory to their own belief system. They don't think about their thinking. And so he's trying to get him to see this. And he got so frustrated. He finally says, okay, look, it's 1940s and I'm a Nazi with a gun pointing at your head. You're a Jew. Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you, And of course he couldn't do it. And that never left my mind. And that haunted me for years because I feel it does embody in a emotional, human, dramatic way, the real problem of evil. And that is this. The real problem of evil is the person who does not believe in God, because if there is no God, there's no such thing as evil. Evil is, of course, an objective, transcendent standard of right and wrong or good and bad, right? And that something is not, and when we say something is evil, we mean that it's wrong, it's immoral, regardless of what anyone may think or feel. That's obviously what makes it evil. Because otherwise, if it's just subjective feelings, then, you could go down the pathway of all these thoughts, all these secular thoughts. And in the end, if there's no God, there is no such thing as evil. So therefore, why are you accusing God of anything? Why would you say, well, why is there evil if there's a God? Well, you don't even have a basis for evil, So really the true problem of evil is for the atheist, because he believes that there's right and wrong, or he believes that it's all relative. But of course, he doesn't want to be treated as if there is no right and wrong, right? And so consequently, that challenging the person to face up to, okay, look, if you're gonna die if you don't tell me a good reason not to kill you. That was my way of sort of embodying that story version of the problem of evil and the existence of God, and how the atheist, in a way, is the one that has the real problem.
I'm going to quote Solzhenitsyn again, who said that the line between good and evil runs straight through the center of every human heart. You think there's the potential for a Charles Cullen in each of us?
Yeah, there really is. As a matter of fact, this is just an Easter egg. And by the way, in the Christian as well, like the Christian has, the Christian worldview is basically that, original sin or total depravity, which means that all of us are stained with sin. We're born evil. We're born bad. Man's nature, human nature, is essentially bad, not good. The humanist believes human nature is good, and it's systems that are bad, right? But no, the Christian says the individual is essentially bad. And so that's why we need to be redeemed. But that essential badness does mean that, so that which is in the serial killer is within me too. I deserve the same judgment of God as a serial killer. So one of the things I did in this story was, and this is nothing more than a sort of just a creative license. I just did it because I thought it would be interesting to express this theme on a deeper level. And that was all the fictional characters in my story, all their names are actually names of real serial killers in history, even the good guys. So, and of course, all that is just to say that, we're all like serial killers before God, you know what I mean? But I didn't pick serial killer names that we would recognize. Some people might who know, like some people might know there are some names that are a little bit more knowable, but obviously I didn't do I didn't do Jeffrey Dahmer, and I didn't do John Wayne Gacy, the obvious ones, right? So because I'm not making any kind of point other than I'm just sort of embodying my theme on every level that I can, right? And then one of the other components is, just for fun, all the names of the buildings on campus. Campus buildings have names. I named them after actual suspects of Jack the Ripper. So, and there's no specific one that is more, I don't know who Jack the Ripper was. So I took names that were interesting and that worked with the story, and the same thing with the story of the names of the serial killers. There's no agenda behind that. I just found names that worked the best for the story. Right. So that was just one way of sort of embodying on every level I can this notion of, the problem of evil is really in man, not in God.
We've been talking about a lot of heavy ideas associated with the novel, but there's also what I would like to point out, a very unexpected strain of humor that runs throughout the novel. I found a few points that were actually laugh out loud funny because wokeness, the reality of wokeness is so ludicrous that it's like a parody of itself. Do you think wokeness has sort of peaked and is beginning to lose ground, as some conservatives think, or is it an ideology that's going to continue to dominate the culture?
Yeah, I don't know, Mark. It's a good question. I do believe it has captured all the institutions. So once you do that, no matter how absurd and wicked an idea may be, if the people in control believe it, they're going to enforce it. They're going to seek to enforce it. And so since all the institutions I do believe they're all captured by this ideology. I do believe it continuing on at least for a while. But will it? So here's the interesting thing about it, and a lot of the elements of wokeness, or what's another way to describe it philosophically. And I think part of its origin is in postmodernism, right? So this is where, the woke thing would be like, trans ideology, right? And what is trans ideology? It's the denial of biological reality, right? It's literally a denial of reality, and it denies science. And so there's a sense in which, as a conservative, I've always believed that ideas can only last so long, and then they will crash into the brick wall of reality. That, you can't deny reality for very long. And, we hear phrases like go woke, go broke. And that does occur sometimes, but a lot of times it doesn't. Like I said, like Barbie movie, so going woke doesn't always mean you go broke. Going woke will, I think Nike had a big dip when they went woke and went racist with that Colin Kaepernick. But then if you looked at them, a year later, the money went back up. So people are stupid. In general, the mobs and people are stupid, and they also forget everything. They're just, we're creatures of comfort. So we don't want to suffer. We don't want to do without our products. We don't want to do without Disney because we love Disney. So we'll still buy the Disney Channel, even though it's preaching hatred to all of our values. Right. And that's the sad thing, is we don't respond like we ought to, but nevertheless, I used to believe that reality would stop bad ideas. And I still have a general belief of that, maybe that's the natural law part of me, but I've seen how it's not the case. Sometimes if you have a worldview and like I said, there's some of the origin of wokeness comes from postmodernism, the Frankfurt School that came to America from overseas. And in the 60s, it began there. And yeah, they're neo-Marxists, they're cultural Marxists, but they also have a basis in postmodernism. And postmodernism it doesn't deny reality technically. It actually denies the ability to know reality. So reality is irrelevant. The only thing we have is different perspectives of reality, and the ways in which we can control the way people think about reality is through language. So that's why they're all focused on properly changing language so that it reflects their worldview of reality, even though it denies reality. Which is why a trans woman is a woman, right? And they're forcing the language to force us to accept the opposite of reality. And there's a side of me that thinks like, yeah, that really, you can't deny science for very long, but so far they're doing it, and hopefully I pray reality may stop it. But when you have a worldview that no longer cares about reality, see, at least, 100 years ago, the atheists, or not even 100 years ago, like let's just say the Enlightenment, right? The atheists of the Enlightenment who hated God and wanted to get rid of him. It's a superstition. They still believe there was reality. But now the postmodernists don't believe reality is knowable. It's something we socially construct. So if you believe in the social construction of reality, it doesn't matter what reality really is. And if anyone's going to be able to continue that on successfully, it's going to be that worldview. Now the question then becomes, okay, so then what about all the people who are becoming, who are the ultimately the slaves of this, or the sufferers of the consequences of this, right? I guess that's where our only hope is that's why I believe that the transformation of the individual through the gospel of Jesus Christ is the only beginning to protect us against that. And the more people that we can persuade, convince, and convert to become Christians, then their unreality will not control us, because we do believe in reality. You know what I mean? And so can that extend beyond the personal individual conversions and take social, grab hold of society? I don't know. I honestly, it's going to last longer than I had thought it was. It's already lasted longer than I thought it would. So I just don't know, other than obviously we should continue to fight it and continue to fight for reality and fight for science and such,
I think you're probably using the word reality to also mean truth with a capital T. And that's what postmodernism really assaults is this: there is no universal truth. There's only my truth and your truth and his or her or Zier's truth. And when you do that, then you've destroyed the notion of truth altogether. And the only thing that matters is your own, I suppose, individual perspective or worldview. What can each of us do to ensure that the true and the good and the beautiful prevail?
Yeah, well, I would say probably this is where you get more maybe activist oriented. As a storyteller, I myself, my whole life is geared towards, I want to communicate, I want to find the truth and communicate that truth to the world to help people find the truth. But what about those people who are not doing things like you and I do, which, we're communicators. And so we believe in speaking the truth is, in a way, the most powerful means of fighting lies. Speaking truth to power, speaking truth to lies. Absolutely. That's the number one. So the number one thing is to don't go along with it. Find ways to graciously, as much as possible. So, for instance, when people are trying to force you to use pronouns, it isn't compassionate to use pronouns. It's actually anti-compassionate, because you're actually promoting mental illness and delusion that will lead to ultimately to self-violence and violence against others. So it's speaking the truth and saying, well, look, I love you, I accept you, but I'm not going to use pronouns that are false of you. And rather than cowering and just going along, because people just tend to go along because they don't want to suffer. People don't want to suffer. But also it goes to these various companies and various products that as they seek to enforce this racist agenda on us, we need to stand up and fight it and stop buying some of their products. Now, it's not possible universally because almost every company now, is rooted in it. But certainly the companies that go out of their way to become extreme about it, like the Targets, right? And there have been boycotts, so to speak, of the Bud Light, right? The Bud Light thing, where although I don't know that was actually anything of an activist thing. It was just a lot of those Bud Light drinkers. It's just like, they really aren't like that. So it's like, I ain't going to drink that crap. Or, I ain't going to drink that trans crap along with it, that kind of thing. But we need to be more activist oriented as much as we can. And I realize you can't do it with everything, but we can focus on those that are the most, I wish we could get more organized like the left does, where they pick one target and then they pile on it and destroy it. And that's how they get rid of these things one by one. And they pick the strongest targets. Like, this is why everyone who's speaking the truth powerfully, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Russell Brand, all of them are being attacked by slander and such. Right. And that's the tactic. I'm not saying that that's what we should do, but we should do that righteously in terms of various companies as they go more woke or whatever. Maybe you should get rid of your Disney channel. But I got kids. I realize how tough and hard that could be. But if we don't take a stand against these, then it's going to just keep coming and it won't stop at all. And then lastly, I would also say to be more politically involved. Most people are not politically involved, and I would say at least on a local level, even in my own town here, I realize like how many people just don't vote or how many people don't care. And it's the left that then takes control of all those. And then we wonder, why are they imposing all this stuff on us? And so you need to become more politically involved. And I know that people hate that because I hate it. I don't like politics, but I've forced myself to get more involved in some of these, find something that you can be a part of. I think a good example of this is, people don't tend to respond until it actually hurts them personally. And that's what's so sad. They don't care about it happening to other people's kids, but when it happens to theirs, then they speak up. Okay. But nonetheless, we've had those cases, right? Like where the parents of students would come to the school boards and start putting their foot down, right? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Do more of that kind of thing and stop letting people just do what they want to do. Get involved in all these things, I'm not even talking about the national elections or anything like that. I'm just talking about local school boards, local governing, all this kind of stuff. People need to be more active because that's where they're taking all the control away. And we have no one to blame but ourselves and our own inactivity when all of a sudden we are now having to follow all these rules and regulations that have been done by the people over us because we didn't step in and do it ourselves.
Yeah, boy, that is almost point for point what I tell people when they say, what can we do about this stuff? First and foremost, as you said, we have to tell the truth, even at the risk of persecution. And that's becoming a very real possibility and a very real threat. But it really has to begin with each person refusing to be coerced into accepting or going along with the lies. You've got to speak the truth. What are you working on now? Can you tell us that?
Well, just marketing the release of Cruel Logic. That goes on for a month or more after you release it for sure. But I'm always thinking and working towards the next novel. Absolutely. So now I have two novels I'm working on. The next Chronicles of the Watcher novel, which and the next theological thriller novel. But at this point, it's still too early for me to talk about it. So I'll let you know, later on in the year, and you can have me on when I'm getting close. I'll let you know. Sorry.
Yeah, well, that's great. What is the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Are you much of a social media guy?
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not big social media. I don't have a lot of involvement, but I do post on my Facebook page and Twitter page whenever I have an interview or anything related to my work. Like, I don't get involved in political discussions and all that kind of stuff. But I do post things that I'm doing related to my work. And so, yeah, if you keep up with me on Facebook, you'll get the latest of things I'm writing and talking about. And Godawa.com is my website, and I have a lot of great, cool stuff there. I wanted to make a website that's interesting to people, not some boring author. But all my books, including Cruel Logic, are available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook on Amazon exclusively. So go to Amazon and you'll be able to find Cruel Logic, and plus, Amazon has a great in-depth descriptions of all my books and series and stuff. So you don't even have to go to Godawa.com. Just go to Amazon. You'll get all the information you want about looking into what books might you be interested in reading of mine.
Brian Godawa, thank you very much for your time and insights today. Thanks for coming on the Right Take podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Please keep up the great work, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
Listeners, thanks for joining us. Just another reminder to subscribe to The Right Take so you don't miss any of the crucial conversations we are having.